Welcome back everyone. In today's video I'm going to make a spline jig for my sacrificial T-track crosscut fence. Now that sounds a little bit complicated, but if you haven't seen the video on how I built my sacrificial crosscut fence with T-tracks on it, go check out the video, it's in the description below. But today I'm adding another attachment that allow me to do spline joints. Why spline joints? Spline joints are a great alternative to doing dovetails or box joints. They are a lot less messy and they're much easier to cut. You can make them different widths. You can do different designs into your boxes with them. It's a pretty common jig on the table saw in general. Usually what you see is a dedicated crosscut fence with a spline jig cradle in the middle of it. For myself, I don't need a whole other crosscut fence. That's why I made this sacrificial T-track fence. So I'm going to make an attachment that will transform this into a sled when I need it to be a sled. So with that, let's get to it. Alright, so let me take you on a little tour of this new spline jig. So far so good, it's working really well. And best of all, I don't have to take off my riving knife on this table saw to use a spline jig. I can leave the riving knife on and it's working just fine. But that's also thanks to the design of the riving knife itself, which I think I'll go over that more in an upcoming video. But it's a nice smooth action. And this is not really a sled per se, this is just another add-on to my T-track system. The beauty of this is that it's on my T-track system for my sacrificial crosscut fence. So unlike making a fixed sled on the miter track, this one actually will move from side to side. If you want to create various kerf widths, now this is just the kerf with one pass, I can actually set up several different widths in the same jig. My table saw does not accept a dado stack, but if it did, I'd be able to do a wider kerf for one width, I'd be able to do a medium kerf, I'd be able to do a thin kerf, so I could have up to 3 different widths for splines in this one jig. And all I'd have to do is move it over according to which one I want to use. Now I'm probably just going to use it with the one width for now. I'm just going to widen it by progressively moving the workpiece across the jig. The way this is set up is I can put my workpiece in and I can predetermine what width I want to work with and set a stop block in here and keep moving things. Now that'll work on smaller boxes. On larger boxes I'll have to do a slightly different kind of configuration, but it's sort of overhang I did on the sled. So you don't want to build your sled as wide as the cradle because then you won't be able to get in here with a clamp and add a stop block. Once this is attached to the sacrificial crosscut fence, it just turns the whole thing into a whole new sled. But the beauty of this is that it just comes off. It's small enough that I can tuck this away on a shelf and I don't have to have it take up too much space. The last thing I want are a whole bunch of crosscut sleds laying around the shop for different purposes. That's why I created this T-track sacrificial fence, so that I could just keep attaching different jigs and components onto it and make it completely modular in terms of how I want to operate. And by the way, the T-tracks are holding up really well, in case you're wondering. They're solid, they're very strong. As I've said in the past, plywood is super strong. Even if you had an aluminum T-track in here, over tightening, I've seen people over tighten them where they just dented the T-track and that's it, it's finished. You can't fix that. I don't need that much pressure to tighten this up and it's ready to go. Well, that concludes making a spline jig for a T-track sacrificial crosscut fence. If your table saw can accept a dado stack, mine can't, then you'll have even more fun with this type of jig. Once this is attached to the sacrificial crosscut fence, it self-squares and just allows me to get on with cutting all the kerfs I need for my spline joints. This is just an experimental miter box that I put together. I've used this for different experiments, like using different types of joinery on the sides, but this time around I used the same box to try out my new jig, and I have to say I'm really happy with the results. With this type of box, you can't do dovetails, you can't do box joints. If you've ever tried doing box joints and dovetails on plywood, you'll know that it pretty much explodes when you run a router bit through it. So the alternative, of course, is using doweling and other types of joinery. Here I've used a domino. So I've got a dowel on one side, and on the corners I've got these splines now. which looks kind of cool, and it's great. It adds a bit of contrast to the box itself. I should mention I did not sand these splines. What I do is once the glue is dry, I come along with a sharp chisel and just take them down so they're almost flush with the surface, and that works really well. No sanding required, and of course you can't really sand on plywood that well, so you want to make sure you're very careful with the surface. If you want to help me continue to make and edit these videos, head on over to my donation page right over here. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. There are a couple more videos on this side you can watch. Until next time, thanks for watching and have a great day.